If someone were to ask when a woman's heart truly dies, Michelle Anna Parker might say, "It doesn't happen with gunfire or tears. It happens in the middle of a waltz, under crystal lights, surrounded by elegant laughter." That night, the Parker mansion on the Upper East Side glowed like an old-world palace. The entire New York elite had gathered, bankers, designers, politicians, and their refined spouses, all there to celebrate the engagement of Victoria Parker, Todd's sweet younger sister, to James Wellington, heir of the prestigious Wellington family from Boston. No one could have imagined that the soiree would turn into a social earthquake, set off by none other than the beautiful woman quietly carrying a tray of champagne, among curious glances Michelle, Todd Parker's wife. The black Valentino gown she wore had been a third anniversary gift. Todd had once bought it for her, holding her hand, smiling as he said, "You deserve only the best." That sentence now echoed in her mind like bitter irony. Michelle had spent an entire month planning this evening. Every white rose, every string of crystal dangling from the ceiling, every melody the quartet played, her meticulous care was in every detail. She wanted her sister-in-law to have a dreamlike night, because she understood what it meant to feel loved, and she wanted others to feel it, that tender thing she had lost long ago. As Michelle walked across the grand hall, a few women looked up, their eyes lingering longer than courtesy allowed. Some whispered behind their champagne glasses, "She's stunning, too lovely to be staff. Don't you know? That's the daughter-in-law of this house." "Really? She looks more like someone from the kitchen." The words fell on Michelle's ears like tiny shards of ice. She smiled faintly, her composure unbroken. Years in this household had trained her well. She had long learned to swallow pain, so that everything appeared proper. Todd was laughing with a group of distinguished guests at the far end of the room. He looked like a magazine cover in his black tuxedo, smiling, polished, and distant. When his eyes flicked toward his wife, it wasn't affection she saw, but the impersonal glance of a man assessing an employee. Michelle remembered the evenings when her smile alone had made him laugh, and those days had faded like a dream dissolved by daylight. And then fate turned the page. As Michelle passed the Wellington family's table, Mrs. Patricia Wellington, a graceful woman with a soft, poised voice, smiled and asked quietly, "James, look at that young woman, how elegant she is. Who is she? A server?" The innocent question reached Margaret Parker's ears, Michelle's mother-in-law. Margaret turned, her lips curling like a blade. "Oh, that's just our housekeeper. Michelle loves to help at parties. She feels important when she gets to carry a tray around." Her voice carried just loud enough for half the room to hear. A ripple of quiet laughter spread like smoke. Michelle froze. Her hand trembled, but she held the tray steady. She took a deep breath and walked on, each step like walking through fire. Todd, hearing his mother, chuckled, a smile half genuine, half cruel. He called out, "Michelle, come here for a moment." Every head turned. Todd raised his voice so all could hear, "This is Michelle, my wife." But as mother said, she loves to handle everything herself. My sister sometimes jokes, "She's our kitchen manager, right?" Scattered laughter. A woman hid her mouth behind her glass. How amusing. But behind that laughter, something cracked. Michelle set the tray on the nearest table and turned to her husband. Her voice was calm, yet every word pierced the air like a needle through silk. "What did you just call me?" Todd shrugged, still smiling for the crowd. "Come on, don't take it so seriously. It was just a bit of fun." "Fun," Michelle repeated softly, a trace of a smile curving her lips. "You've always been good at that, Todd, especially when the joke cost someone their dignity." The room went silent. The murmurs stopped cold. Margaret hissed, "What are you doing, Michelle? The guests are watching. Pick up that tray and don't embarrass us further." Michelle looked at her, so calmly that even Margaret faltered. "Embarrass?" she asked softly. "I think we've already gone well past that." Then, to everyone's astonishment, Michelle slipped the ring from her finger, the 3-carat diamond ring Todd had once knelt to offer in the garden of this very home. She placed it on the table, as the music continued to play. "You're right, Todd. I've always served. I cook, I organize, I mend your family's image. But there's one thing you forget." She lifted her chin, her voice steady and clear. "I am not anyone's servant. A hush fell over the hall. Then Michelle smiled a beautiful, tear-warmed smile. "This was the wedding gift you gave me, and a promise to love me forever. I'm returning it because those promises no longer mean a thing." She slid the ring toward him. "Here, I'm no longer yours." The ring rolled, hitting the marble floor with a sharp ting that echoed across the crystal hall. Todd stood frozen, color draining from his face. Margaret's mouth fell open, and Michelle, the woman they had just called the help, walked away through the stunned crowd of Manhattan's finest. No one realized that in that instant, the engagement party became legend. They would say no music could ever erase the sound of that ring striking marble. No chandelier light could outshine the serenity in Michelle's eyes as she walked out. The room seemed to lose warmth when the grand doors closed behind her. Inside, Todd stood motionless. Victoria approached, trembling. "What have you done?" she whispered. Todd said nothing. He just stared at the spot where the ring had fallen, hands shaking as if he'd lost something too immense to grasp. Margaret stood near the entrance, trying to maintain her poise. But panic was already blooming within her. She knew it wasn't just a daughter-in-law who had walked out. It was a social explosion. She knew the press was there, and by morning, New York wouldn't be talking about the Wellington Parker engagement anymore, but about the wife humiliated before hundreds of guests. Outside, Michelle stood before the mansion gates. The October air of Manhattan bit cold against her skin, wind tugging at her dress. She drew a deep breath, eyes lifted toward the city lights and smoke. Her shoulders trembled not from weakness, but release. For the first time in years, she felt free. A taxi passed. She raised her hand and said softly, "Lexington Grand Hotel, please." The cab pulled away, leaving the glowing Parker mansion behind its people still clinging to their pride. Michelle leaned her head against the window, watching the city blur like fragments of memory. Todd's last words replayed in her mind. "You're only good at serving others." She smiled not from pain, but from clarity. The man who once vowed to protect her had only ever protected his ego. She didn't cry. When a woman has already cried herself empty, only silence remains. She closed her eyes and heard her own voice within. "Sometimes, someone has to step on you for you to realize you can stand." That night, Manhattan slept peacefully. But for Michelle Anna Parker, everything was beginning. She didn't know where life would take her next, but she knew one thing for sure. This time, she wouldn't live to be loved. She would live to be herself. Far behind her, the lights of the Parker mansion still burned like a lighthouse for souls still lost in ambition. And Michelle, in that yellow cab speeding through the night, whispered, "Goodbye to the years I bowed my head. Welcome, freedom." The taxi merged into the traffic along Lexington Avenue, carrying her away from the past. And in the dim glow of Manhattan, a new chapter began. The diamond ring rolled once across the marble floor, struck the leg of a leather chair, and stopped. Light from the crystal chandelier struck the small stone, scattering a cold gleam sharp as a blade. The air was still thick with the scent of wine and expensive perfume. No one dared to breathe too loudly. The elegant smiles from moments ago had frozen in place. People looked at one another, then at Todd still standing in the hall center, eyes hollow, hands limp at his sides. Somewhere in the orchestra, the violin faltered. The musician's hand trembled, unsure whether to keep playing, until the conductor signaled to stop. A dense silence filled the Parker mansion so heavy it felt like the house had never witnessed disgrace until this night. Victoria, the newly engaged sister, was the first to speak, her voice shaking. "Todd, what have you done?" Todd didn't answer. He stared at where the ring had fallen, then turned away. Margaret Parker tried to appear composed, but her face was ashen. She forced a brittle smile toward the bewildered guests. "Oh, just a little misunderstanding. You know how Michelle can be overly sensitive. She's always been that way." A middle-aged man, one of the Parker family's business partners, leaned closer and murmured, "Margaret, do you want me to tell the reporters it was all just a misunderstanding?" She nodded sharply. "Do it. Right now." Meanwhile, Todd walked to the bar, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and drank it in one gulp. He said nothing. Whispers filled the room. "God, she's brave," someone said. "Or insane," another replied. And Michelle, she was gone. No one knew she had stood outside the grand gates 10 minutes earlier, gazing up at the glowing windows where laughter still echoed. The wind caught her dress, and instantly she realized she was free. She had crossed the threshold between being controlled and being in control, and no one could ever take that from her again. Inside, everything was crumbling. Margaret leaned close to her son and hissed, "You cannot let this get out. Do you understand? Tomorrow is the Wellington's press conference. Our reputation is finished if the papers discover that Parker's daughter-in-law walked out." Todd sat down heavily, head bowed. "Mother, listen to me." His voice was hoarse. "Michelle, she's not what you think. She saved me. She saved this family." Margaret gave a bitter laugh. "Saved us? How? That woman has been nothing but trouble. If you hadn't married her, we wouldn't have been branded as people who married beneath our class." Todd looked up, eyes red. "You're right. I married her for appearances. But Mother, she's the one who saved us from the scandal 4 years ago. She's the one who transferred all our debt into the charity fund." Margaret froze. "What?" Todd bowed his head. "If she hadn't done that, the Parker Group would have gone bankrupt." No one spoke again. The orchestra had long gone silent, and the guests quietly left, trying to maintain their dignity. But the stories they carried would fuel Manhattan gossip for an entire winter. When the clock struck 11:30, Todd finally lifted his head, his eyes lost. "I have to find her." "You will not," Margaret snapped. "You can't go out tonight. The press is outside. If they see you chasing after her, everything will explode." "Dort mit her Hase." "Explode?" "Mother, it already has." He walked out, leaving her standing there. Meanwhile, Michelle's taxi stopped across town before the Lexington Grand Hotel, an old building with windows glowing like candlelight. The driver turned and asked, "Need help with your bags, ma'am?" Michelle shook her head gently. "No, thank you." She paid the fare and stepped out, clutching her small purse. Her heels felt heavy, but her steps were light. At the front desk, she asked for a room, simple, quiet, and under no name anyone would recognize. The young receptionist smiled. "Of course, ma'am. What name should I put on the reservation?" Michelle hesitated for a moment, then she said, "Anna. Just Anna." Her middle name was one that no one in the Parker family had ever spoken with respect. Room 1213 opened to warmth and stillness. She slipped off her shoes, sat by the window, and looked down at Lexington Avenue, where cars streamed endlessly below. From afar, the city buzzed with life, yet inside her was a silence so deep she could hear her own heartbeat. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of being called by anyone's voice. That night, Michelle sat awake until dawn. She didn't cry. She only watched the city lights and thought of the fallen ring. Such a small thing carried the weight of a life imprisoned. Now, it lay behind her, in the cold light of the ballroom where she'd once been turned into the help. The next morning, the New York Post ran a headline. "Engagement of the century turns into nightmare. Todd Parker's wife leaves party in tears." Beneath it was a photo Michelle walking away, calm-faced, her dress caught in the wind. The image went viral within hours. The whole city buzzed with questions. Why did she leave? Was she betrayed? Did Todd cheat? As speculation swirled, Margaret Parker called an emergency meeting in her 42nd floor office at Parker Group. Her voice was sharp, controlled. "We need a new narrative. Tell the press Michelle is unwell. Say she's taking a break for treatment. The more sympathetic she seems, the less they'll pry." Todd said nothing. He knew it was the only way to protect the family's reputation, but he also knew it was the quickest way to destroy Michelle's. "I won't lie," he murmured. Margaret's gaze turned to ice. "Then what will you say? Did you humiliate your wife in front of hundreds? That the Parkers don't respect women? Is that what you want?" Todd didn't answer. He only looked out the window at the gleaming city, knowing she was somewhere out there. At the Lexington Grand, Michelle sat before the mirror. Her face was pale, but her eyes gleamed with strange clarity. Her phone buzzed dozens of missed calls and messages. Todd, Victoria, old acquaintances. She didn't answer. None of them deserved her voice now. Then another message appeared from Victoria. "Michelle, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would end like this. My brother doesn't deserve you. But please know I still believe in you." Michelle smiled, a small, fragile smile like a breath. She typed back, "Thank you. Don't let anyone teach you that silence is wise. Sometimes, silence is guilt." She hit send, set the phone down, and took out a folded business card. Dr. Sarah Moore, her old colleague from a children's charity project. After a pause, she dialed. A familiar voice answered. "Hello? Sarah, it's Anna." A beat of stunned quiet. "Anna, my God, it's been ages. Are you okay?" Michelle gave a soft laugh. "Both yes and no. But I need to see you." "How soon?" "Now. I need to hear a voice that doesn't lie." 30 minutes later, they met at a small cafe on 53rd Street. Sarah Moore, a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and steady hands, reached across the table and held hers. "What did he do to you?" Michelle smiled faintly. "Nothing. He just reminded me who I am." Sarah studied her. "What will you do now?" "I don't know yet. But I'm not going back. And their reputation? It's no longer my concern." Sarah was silent for a moment, then said softly, "Would you like to come back to work? The foundation's expanding. I need someone like you." Michelle looked out the rain-dappled window. "Maybe it's time. I don't want to be someone people pity anymore. I want to be called by my own name." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Then start over, Anna." That afternoon, Michelle returned to her hotel and opened her laptop. She began typing the first lines of a new proposal. "Urban Child Development Project. Education for the Future." Each word she wrote felt like stitching back the torn pieces of her life. Outside, New York turned a soft amber hue. Traffic hummed below. She smiled the quiet smile of someone who has walked through a storm and found herself on the other side. That night, in room 1213, Michelle didn't sleep. She brewed tea, turned on the television, and caught the evening news. The Parker family denies rumors. According to their spokesperson, Mrs. Michelle Parker is currently undergoing treatment for exhaustion. There is no separation. Michelle let out a low laugh. "Exhaustion? Yes, I'm exhausted, but not from illness. From living too long for everyone but myself." She turned off the TV, stood, and opened the window. Night wind swept in, carrying the sounds of car horns and jazz from a nearby bar. She closed her eyes and drew a deep breath. The New York sky was dark but not black, and in the city that never sleeps, Michelle Anna Parker knew one truth. She had just been born again. The New York night was so cold that even breath turned to white mist. Michelle wrapped herself in a long cardigan, pulled on a wool hat, and stepped out of the Lexington Grand Hotel just past 11. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick, neon lights rippling across puddles like broken glass. She hailed a rideshare. When the driver asked for her destination, she said softly, 52nd Street. The Parker Mansion. The driver turned, surprised. "The Parker place? The press has been swarming there all week, ma'am." Michelle smiled faintly. "I know." The car pulled away. The city was deep in darkness, but her heart was clear she couldn't truly leave while something still lay imprisoned there. Not a possession, but the truth. 15 minutes later, the car stopped before the tall iron gates of the mansion. Most of the lights inside were off now, except for a few glowing windows. Margaret's room, perhaps. Michelle stood at the gate, peering through the bars. This had once been her home. She had brewed Todd's coffee here every morning and chosen their music every night. Now it was only an empty shell filled with painful echoes. She walked around to the side entrance, the service door leading to the kitchen. The security code for Todd's birthday was still unchanged. The door clicked open easily, and she almost laughed. He never learned much about protection, did he? The house was silent. The faint scent of oak, old jasmine, and Margaret's perfume still lingered. Her heels creaked softly across the wooden floor. The living room looked the same, except the wedding portrait was gone. Only photos of Todd, his mother, and Victoria at the engagement party remained on the shelf. No trace of her. No sign she had ever belonged there. Michelle exhaled quietly, then climbed the staircase. Her bedroom lay at the end of the hallway, door closed, untouched. The familiar scent of aged wood washed over her when she opened it. The bed was neatly made, sheets pristine white, as if no one had ever slept there. She went to the wardrobe, knelt, and pulled out the bottom drawer. There it was, a small walnut box, the size of her two hands, its corner chipped from when she dropped it years ago. Her fingers trembled as she brushed the lid. She remembered every item inside, each a fragment of her life spent for the Parker family. The box opened with a soft click. Inside were documents, envelopes, letters, and a photograph of her with Richard Parker, Todd's father, taken at the signing ceremony for the Parker Foundation donation years ago. She had conceived the idea, lobbied sponsors, and saved the family from financial ruin after their disastrous investment scandal. And inside that box, recordings, emails, evidence that, if revealed, would destroy the Parker name forever. Michelle smiled sadly. "You all forgot me so quickly. But the truth doesn't." She took a sheet of paper and wrote, "I don't need your gratitude. Just remember I was here, not to serve you, but to save you. When you need to remember who I was, open this box." She folded the note, placed it on top, and closed the lid. The hallway clock struck midnight. Michelle set the box on Todd's desk where he used to sit reading the morning papers, then turned away without another glance. At the window, she paused. The city beyond still shimmered. "Goodbye," she whispered, "to the house that once called me a stranger." Then she slipped downstairs. As she passed the living room, she heard footsteps, Margaret's voice, faint but near. Michelle froze behind a large cabinet. "Is someone here?" Margaret called, her tone wary. Through the crack, Michelle saw her moving slowly, a glass of water in hand, eyes scanning the shadows. Then the older woman turned away. A gust of wind from the open kitchen door fluttered the paper Michelle had written. It slipped off the table and landed beside the wooden box. Michelle waited a moment longer, then slipped out through the service door. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Outside, the wind was sharp. She pulled up her collar and walked along the sidewalk. A raindrop landed on her forehead and rolled down a final farewell from that house. She didn't know that the box would be found within days, and everything would change. It was nearly 1 in the morning when she returned to the hotel. New York was unusually quiet. Only the hum of the air conditioner and her footsteps broke the silence in the long hallway. She removed her coat, sat down, poured water, and opened her laptop. The screen was filled with fresh headlines, photos from the party, the Parker Group statements, and public speculation. But she felt no pain now. What weighed on her was memory. She remembered her first day at the Parker mansion, young, hopeful, holding white roses. Margaret had looked her up and down and asked, "Who are you?" And Todd had answered, "The woman I'm going to marry." Margaret paused and said, "She doesn't belong with us." That day, Michelle had believed time and love would prove her worth. She was wrong. For years, she had carried the family's name through every scandal, every event, every social climb. When Todd failed in business, she used her savings to cover his debts. She had done everything for one small place in that family. But to them, she had never been more than the elegant help. She laughed softly. The sound echoed faintly, bitter, but strangely light. "Michelle Anna Parker, for so long you lived to be accepted. Tonight, you live to be free." Her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. "Michelle?" The voice was hoarse, tired Todd's. She said nothing. It continued, "I know where you are. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Mother was wrong. I was wrong. I don't know why I said those things." Michelle sighed. "It's not that you didn't know, Todd. It's that you never thought I mattered enough for silence." There was a long pause. Then he whispered, "I miss you." She replied, calm and steady, "Do you miss me or the feeling of being forgiven?" He said nothing. Only his breath trembled across the line before the call ended. Michelle set the phone down, shaking her head. No anger was left, only an old sorrow finally laid to rest. She walked to the window and looked out at the street below. Cars passed, lights reflecting on the glass. Todd was probably sitting somewhere in that mansion, staring at the ring on the table, wondering how it had all ended so fast. But Michelle knew it hadn't ended. It had just begun. She had left behind the wooden box, the memory box, a seed of truth that would grow, cracking every wall of deceit the Parkers had built. "Sometimes," she whispered, You must walk away first to be seen. Then she turned off the light and lay down. Outside, the New York rain began again, soft against the window pane, mingling with the rhythm of her breathing. A chapter closed the chapter of endurance, wounds, and broken promises. When morning came, she would begin another one of work, of freedom, and of a woman who would never bow her head again. New York woke up to the news. The city had barely shaken off the morning mist when the phones of the elite began to ring non-stop. On the cover of the New York Mirror, a bold headline stretched across the front page: Collapse of the Engagement of the Century. Michelle Parker, the mysterious wife of Todd Parker, vanishes into the night. Below it, a photo captured her leaving the mansion, her black dress caught in the wind, her gaze distant, unyielding. The New York Herald took a gentler but no less provocative tone. Cracks in the Parker household. Todd Parker's wife leaves after clash with mother-in-law. Readers needed no more than that. It was enough to ignite a wildfire of gossip. That morning, the coffee of Manhattan's upper class no longer tasted of mocha or vanilla. It was flavored with curiosity, speculation, and the subtle thrill of schadenfreude. Every cafe in the city buzzed with talk of Michelle. Who is she really? I heard she's mentally unstable. No, she's just doing it for attention. Meanwhile, on the 42nd floor of the Parker Group tower, the heavy conference room doors were closed. Todd stood by the window, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, watching the stream of traffic below. His thoughts were a tangled blur. At the head of the table, Margaret Parker sat straight-backed, her voice sharp and cold as steel. We have to strike back immediately. I won't let anyone think the Parker family is falling apart. Beside her sat Elliot, the head of communications, the same man who had steered them out of countless scandals. He slid a folder toward Todd. We've drafted a press statement. It just needs your signature. Todd read the words aloud. Mrs. Michelle Parker is taking time off to rest due to psychological exhaustion. The Parker family asks for privacy and understanding during this difficult period. He looked up, eyes rimmed red. You're turning her into a lunatic? Margaret's tone was icy. She did that herself, Todd. The entire city saw her meltdown. What do you expect me to say, that your wife lost control at a formal event? She didn't lose control, Todd shot back. She couldn't bear being humiliated. Enough. Margaret slammed the table. You don't understand media. In this world, whoever tells the story first wins, and we will be first. No one dared breathe. Todd sank into his chair, silent. He knew his mother was right in the most terrifying way. Outside, the media machine roared to life. Television panels, podcasts, social feeds, all spinning the same narrative. A fragile woman on the edge, a husband caught in turmoil, a noble family under siege. In less than 24 hours, Michelle, once celebrated for her grace and charity, had been reduced to a punchline. Talk shows invited psychologists to speculate. She's clearly under pressure from high society expectations. Or maybe she just craves attention. Online, the hashtag runaway wife trended worldwide. Memes appeared. Can't handle your mother-in-law? Throw the ring and run. Michelle sat in her hotel room, scrolling through the flood of commentary. She didn't feel anger, just a spreading chill inside her chest. I didn't run, she whispered. I walked out of my prison. She set her phone aside and turned to her laptop, editing her charity project proposal. But her hands trembled not from fear, but from the realization of how easily words could kill a person. That evening, Sarah Moore came by. She carried a paper bag filled with magazines. Have you seen these yet? She asked softly. Michelle shook her head. Sarah opened one and placed it on the table. On the glossy cover, From Angel of Charity to Runaway Wife, Michelle Parker and the mystery behind her smile. Michelle read slowly, line by line, then smiled faintly. Well written. They even claim I attacked my mother-in-law. Sarah said nothing. She just reached out and took her hand. What will you do now? Michelle gazed out the window. City lights danced in her eyes, reflecting a determination Sarah had never seen before. I won't react. Not yet. Sometimes silence is how you make others hear their lies echo loud enough to scare themselves. 2 days later, Margaret held a press conference. That morning, The Parker Group tower swarmed with reporters, cameras flashing, microphones raised, voices buzzing. Margaret emerged immaculate, flawless makeup, an elegant dove, grey dress, the poise of a woman unshaken. "Thank you all for coming," she began smoothly. "Our family deeply regrets the recent misunderstandings. My daughter-in-law, Michelle Parker, is receiving medical care for exhaustion. We ask that you respect her privacy and wish her well." Questions erupted instantly. Is it true she suffered depression due to family conflict? "Mrs. Parker, did you insult her during the engagement party? Has she left for good?" Margaret smiled tightly. "I love my daughter-in-law. I would never insult her. She needs time." The flashbulbs flared, but the storm was far from over. That night, Michelle received an email from a young journalist, Evan, who once wrote about her charity work. "I don't believe what they're saying. I know you. If you ever want to tell your story, I'll listen." Michelle read it, then quietly deleted the message. She wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. The next morning, Sarah called. "Hey, the Herald just pulled their article from the front page. Someone up top must be nervous." Michelle frowned. Nervous about what? Maybe the truth. Victoria stepped into her mother's study inside the Parker mansion at that exact moment. "Mother, I need to know the truth. About Michelle. Was it really like the papers say?" Margaret didn't look up. "You don't need to know. But I do. Because it's the truth and she's still my sister-in-law." Margaret lifted her gaze, eyes cold as glass. "You think I wanted this? You think I'm not exhausted?" She chose to walk away, Victoria. She couldn't handle the pressure. "I'm just protecting this family's name." Victoria clenched her fists. "No, you're protecting yourself. And I'm afraid, Mother, that you're losing everything in doing so." "How dare you?" Margaret snapped. "I dare because it's the truth." Victoria turned and left. She didn't know that those words would become the first tremor of the great collapse. Meanwhile, Michelle worked late into the night in her quiet hotel room. Her new charity project was taking shape. She sent emails to old colleagues, gathering support. Sarah called it the blueprint for rebirth. One night, as Michelle typed, her phone buzzed again, a message from Victoria. "I believe you. I'll find a way to help." Michelle smiled softly. No more words were needed. It was enough that someone in that house still remembered her as she was. She whispered, almost to herself, "Lies travel fast, but truth always finds its way home." Outside, the New York sky broke open with rain, and beneath the drumming of water on the windows, Michelle listened to the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat, calm, certain, knowing the storm had only just begun. One November morning, thin sunlight streamed through the window of room 1213 at the Lexington Grand Hotel. Michelle woke earlier than usual. Her coffee still steamed on the table beside an open laptop and a half-finished proposal. Weeks had passed since the night she left the Parker mansion. The media storm surrounding the broken engagement of the century had finally calmed, replaced by newer topics, politics, fashion, fresh scandals. Yet sometimes, her name still surfaced buried in podcasts or half-sympathetic, half-sneering commentaries. Michelle no longer cared. She had learned one essential truth. People can only hurt you if you let them define your worth. That morning, she scrolled through her contacts and tapped on Dr. Sarah Moore. Sarah's warm, steady voice came through the line, tinged with joy. "Anna, you're up early. I've thought it through, Sarah. I'm ready to come back. No more hiding." Sarah laughed softly. "Then my strong girl has truly returned." They arranged to meet at the Street Clare Foundation office, a charity devoted to helping underprivileged children, where Michelle had once worked years before. By noon, New York was drenched in gold sunlight. Michelle wore a white blouse and a beige wool coat and tied her hair neatly back. When she entered the Street Clare lobby, familiar faces turned toward her in surprise. "Oh my God, Michelle. Anna, we thought you'd disappeared." She smiled gently. "Maybe I just went looking for myself for a while." They hugged, congratulated, and showed her around the expanded office. On the walls hung photos from years past, Michelle and the volunteer team in the Bronx. Michelle holding a curly-haired little girl at the opening of an education center. Each picture reminded her why she had started in the first place. Not for fame, not for the Parkers, but because she believed that if you could help one child, the world might soften a little. Sarah led her into a small conference room and handed her a folder. "I've got a new initiative, the Urban Child Development Fund. I want you to lead it. No one else could do it better." Michelle hesitated. "Me? After everything the press wrote about me?" Sarah smiled. "You know what I believe, Anna, that scandals don't define people, but by how they rise after them." Michelle was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I'll do it." That night, she sat by the hotel window, the city glittering beyond the glass. She opened a small notebook and wrote her first line for this new beginning. Day 1 of true freedom. No longer someone's wife, no longer tied to the Parkers. Just me, Michelle Anna. She put the pen down, closed her eyes, and smiled. Outside, the hum of cars, laughter, and jazz from a nearby bar mingled. The city was breathing with her. She had been gone long enough to stop fearing being forgotten, because now she didn't need to be remembered. She only needed to exist. A week later, the New Yorker published a small piece on the community page. Former project director Michelle Anna Parker returns to lead the Urban Child Development Fund, focusing on education and mental health for needy children. No photos, no interviews, just a few quiet lines. But it was enough to bring her name back this time, not as a scandal, but as quiet respect. The article circulated quietly among non-profit circles. A few days later, Catherine Morrison, head of the Meridian Club, a women's organization, called her. "Anna, you must come to next week's gathering. We're hosting a forum on women and community. We'd like you to speak." Michelle laughed softly. "Catherine, you know I'm not much for the spotlight." "No, Anna, you belong there more than anyone. This isn't about jewelry or status anymore. It's about women who stand again after being broken. You're proof of that." Michelle paused, then said, "I'll be there." That Friday evening, the Meridian Club building gleamed against the city skyline. It was once a place Michelle attended arm in arm with Todd, a stage for Manhattan's elite. Tonight, she returned alone, not as someone's wife, but as herself, Michelle Anna, a woman who had emerged whole through the ashes. As she entered, conversations hushed. A few whispers floated, a few curious eyes followed. Then Catherine approached, wrapping her in a firm embrace. "Thank you for coming." Michelle smiled softly. "Thank you for not believing everything they said." The forum began. When Catherine invited Michelle to speak, the room fell completely silent. Michelle stepped onto the small stage, the golden light washing over her face. She took the microphone, drew a breath, and began. "There was a time when I thought my worth came from belonging to someone. I tried everything to be accepted. But then I learned no one can give you value if you don't give it to yourself." She looked across the audience rows of women, some who had once smiled at her, some who had turned away, some who had stayed silent. "I'm not perfect. I've learned that even when people tarnish your name, the truth doesn't change. I was once called the help, but today I stand here to say serving others is never shameful, as long as it's a service you choose freely." Applause erupted, not polite, but real, full, and warm. Michelle bowed her head slightly, smiling through the sound. When she stepped off the stage, Catherine took her hand, eyes shining. "You just reclaimed everything with your own voice." Later, as the event wound, Michelle stood by the balcony, gazing at the rain-slicked street below. Manhattan's lights shimmered on the wet pavement. Across the street, a man stood watching her, tall, quiet, in a grey coat. She recognized him instantly, James Wellington, Victoria's fiancé. They hadn't spoken since that night, but his eyes now held no pity, only calm admiration. He crossed the street and stopped a few paces away. "Are you well, Michelle?" She smiled gently. "I am. Thank you. And I'm sorry for those who weren't brave enough to be." She shook her head. "No one needs to apologize for anyone else, James. All we need is someone willing to tell the truth." James nodded, the streetlight glinting in his eyes. "Maybe soon the truth will speak for itself." They stood for a while in quiet understanding, two people connected not by the past, but by the honesty of survival. That night, back in her hotel room, Michelle opened her notebook again and wrote, "The day I stepped out of the shadows, People still looked at me curiously, but I don't need them to understand. I only need to keep walking toward my own light. She closed the notebook. The city's glow spilled into the room, reflecting off the teacup by the window. And for the first time in months, Michelle felt herself truly alive. Not escaping, but beginning again. Snow had come to New York. The season's first flakes drifted gently over rooftops, blanketing Fifth Avenue in white, wrapping the city in a quiet shimmer. But for Margaret Parker, it was the coldest winter she could remember. She sat in the mansion's living room, the firelight flickering across her tired face. In front of her lay the morning paper. On the front page, Michelle Anna, the woman who returned with the power of compassion. Beneath the headline was a photograph of Michelle at the gala for the Urban Child Development Fund, eyes bright, smile serene. Margaret stared at it for a long time. In that calm expression, she saw something familiar, not defiance, but peace. The kind of peace she herself had never known. For 30 years, Margaret Parker believed power could fix anything: money, reputation, connections. However, only after Michelle left did she understand the actual collapse. Business partners had begun to drift away. Reporters, once deferential, now asked pointed questions. Why was Michelle treated that way? The lies she'd spun so carefully were beginning to fray, and Todd, her son, her pride was slipping. Now, he rarely went to the office, and whiskey had become his constant companion. Victoria, once her bright, loyal daughter, had grown distant, too quieter, more thoughtful. Worse still, she had started talking to Michelle again. One evening, Margaret entered the study to find Victoria watching a recording of Michelle's Meridian Club speech. Michelle's voice filled the room. Serving others is never shameful. What's shameful is forcing someone to serve you to hide your emptiness. Victoria turned off the screen and faced her mother. I think you should see her. Margaret frowned. For what purpose? To say the things you never said. That sentence lingered in Margaret's mind all night. She couldn't sleep. The newspaper on her desk seemed to watch her. Michelle's eyes gazing out from the photo like a mirror she could no longer avoid. By morning, she had made up her mind. For the first time, she left the house without makeup, assistants, or guards. Just a long coat, a scarf, and her unsteady hands on the steering wheel. Her destination was the Meridian Club, where she knew Michelle and now worked with Catherine Morrison. The snow had thickened by noon. The club's parking lot was coated in white. Margaret stepped out, trembling not just from the cold, but from something deeper she refused to name. Inside the lobby, the receptionist looked up, startled. Mrs. Parker? Margaret nodded. I'm here to see Michelle Anna. The receptionist hesitated, then said, She's upstairs, meeting room 2. Shall I let her know? No need, Margaret said softly. I'd rather surprise her. She climbed the staircase slowly, her heart beat loud in her chest. When the door opened, Michelle stood beside the conference table with Catherine, reviewing documents. Both women looked up at once. For a moment, the world went silent. Even the snow outside seemed to pause. Catherine glanced between them. I'll give you two a moment. She slipped out quietly, closing the door behind her. Two women once bound by the same family, now separated by a canyon of years and wounds, faced each other in the stillness. Michelle said nothing. She stood straight-backed, her eyes steady, not cold, not trembling. Margaret studied her, then exhaled. You've changed so much. Michelle's voice was soft. I haven't changed, Mrs. Parker. I've just come back to who I really am. Margaret sank into a chair, gripping her handbag tightly. I came to talk, not to argue. I have no reason to argue, Michelle replied calmly. I stopped needing to win conversations a long time ago. Something in Margaret's face shifted, her gaze losing its sharpness. You know, these past months I haven't been able to sleep. I hear people talk about you on the news, at parties. Everyone says your name, and I feel afraid. Michelle tilted her head slightly. Afraid of me? Margaret nodded faintly. Afraid you'll come back. Afraid people will find out everything. Afraid that after all these years, I was wrong. Michelle poured tea, her movements slow, deliberate. You're right. You were wrong. But I didn't come here for a confession. Margaret frowned. Then what do you want? Michelle met her eyes. Nothing. I already have what I need, peace. I hope you learn what took me half a lifetime to understand. No one stands above another just because they have more money. Silence settled between them. Margaret's breath hitched a sound somewhere between a sigh and a sob. You always had a way of making people feel small. Michelle smiled gently. No, I only speak the truth. The room was quiet again. Then Margaret whispered, You know, I was jealous of you. Michelle blinked. Jealous? Yes, you had something I never did trust. Todd loved you. The staff respected you. People believed in you. And me, I only ever had power. But power doesn't make anyone love you. Her voice cracked. Maybe that's why I hated you. For the first time during their meeting, Michelle's eyes softened. You know, I once wanted to call you mother. Truly. But I realized sometimes people aren't born to love each other. Margaret bowed her head, her voice breaking. If I said I'm sorry, would you believe me? Michelle answered quietly. I would. But forgiveness is something else. Margaret looked up, tears shimmering. Could you forgive me? Michelle walked to the window, where snow was falling in soft sheets of white. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I refuse to carry the hate anymore. It doesn't make me stronger, it just means I'm done standing in the same place as you. Margaret's lips trembled. You really have changed. No, Michelle said, turning toward her. I just stopped living to please others. After a long silence, Margaret said quietly, You should know. Todd still hasn't let you go. Michelle's expression remained calm. I don't need him to forget me. I need him to live honestly with his choices. Margaret nodded slowly. They stood in the hush of that sunlit, snow-bright room, no longer enemies, just two weary souls meeting at the end of a long road. As Margaret reached the door, she turned back. Her voice was rough. Thank you for not slamming the door in my face. Michelle smiled faintly. You're still Todd's mother, and you taught me what it means to find strength in weakness. I don't hate you. Margaret walked away, her shoulders curved, snow swirling around her as she stepped outside. Michelle watched her go and let out a long breath that carried years of weight. That afternoon, Sarah Moore stopped by and found Michelle staring out the window, a cold cup of tea on the table. You saw her, didn't you? Sarah asked. Michelle nodded. How do you feel? Light, she said softly. So light, as if I finally set down the stone I'd carried for years. Sarah smiled. Not everyone dares to forgive, especially when they hold the power to destroy. Michelle looked up, her voice calm. I don't want revenge, Sarah. I want to live. Outside, snow kept falling. In the quiet room, Michelle sat bathed in the pale winter light, her gaze fixed on the skyline where Manhattan's evening lights began to flicker, brilliant and distant. She knew this wasn't the end, but after today's encounter, she was finally ready to move forward, no longer burdened by hatred, only carrying the quiet flame of truth waiting to be set free. Night draped itself over New York, glittering like a diamond spinning beneath 1,000 lights. From afar, the Ritz-Carlton rose like a palace in the city's heart. Luxury cars pulled to the entrance, releasing guests in black tuxedos, jeweled gowns, and fur-lined coats. Inside, the gala for the City Children's Future Fund was about to begin, an event the press had already dubbed Michelle Anna's Night. Since leaving the Parker family, Michelle hadn't just returned to her old work. She had built an empire of philanthropy. She'd raised over $2 million within 3 weeks of her Meridian Club speech. Now, the same people who once dismissed her were competing for a seat at her table. But Michelle hadn't come back for revenge. She'd come back to rebuild the world with the very hands they once forced to bow. That night, she wore a sapphire blue gown that swept the floor, open-backed and delicately lined with crystal beads. Her hair was tied in a low bun, and pearl earrings were her only adornment. It wasn't opulent, it was grace, the kind that money could never buy. The ballroom seemed still momentarily when she descended the hotel's grand staircase. Some recognized her, some pretended not to, but everyone felt it. This return was too radiant, quiet, and powerful to ignore. Beside her stood Dr. Sarah Moore, beaming with pride. Sarah whispered, You know, Anna, tonight isn't just the launch of a foundation. It's proof that sometimes failure is just the runway for flight. Michelle smiled faintly, glancing up at the chandelier's rain of light. I only hope that light falls where it should on the children out there, not on me. The evening unfolded in music and elegance. Donors, politicians, business leaders, artists, all were there. Cameras flashed incessantly, and at the center of it all stood Michelle, calm and luminous, as if she'd always belonged under that golden light. Her speech was simple, without theatrics. I've learned that no one is too small to create change. Each heart that feels compassion is a candle, and if we light enough of them, the world will glow. Thunderous applause filled the room. The crowd rose to their feet. Michelle bowed slightly in thanks, but her gaze caught on someone in the back row. James Wellington. He wasn't clapping. He stood there, still and quiet, his eyes steady, carrying admiration and something that looked like regret. When the gala ended, Michelle slipped into the corridor outside, seeking a breath of calm. Behind her, a familiar voice spoke. "You were right, real light always comes from where no one expects it." She turned. James stood a few steps away, his posture composed, his expression earnest. "We meet again," she said softly. "No," he replied. "I came looking for you." They sat on the terrace of the 36th floor, overlooking the glowing city. The wind was sharp, their glasses of wine catching the flicker of light. James broke the silence. "After that night at the Meridian Club, I couldn't stop thinking about you. Not out of curiosity, but because there's something in your story that doesn't add up." Michelle's lips curved into a quiet smile. "In this city, Mr. Wellington, everyone hides something." "True," he said. "But in yours, the pieces don't fit. You left, you vanished. And then you came back with funding, a team, a plan that looks like it's been years in the making. I don't think you just walked away from the Parkers. I think you're building something far bigger." She set her glass down, meeting his gaze. "Maybe you're right. Or maybe," she said softly, "I'm simply giving back what the world owes to children it forgot." James leaned back, voice low. "Did you know Victoria found the box?" Michelle raised a brow. "So she opened it." "She did. And it changed everything. She's different now. She said you taught her what unconditional love actually means." Michelle's eyes softened. "Victoria's a good soul. She was trapped between two generations that never learned how to love properly." James nodded. "And me? I'm not sure the engagement will continue. My family's pulling back from their alliance with the Parkers." Michelle looked at him. "Because of me?" He shook his head. "No, because of the truth." The music from the ballroom drifted faintly through the night. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. Both understood that some battles are fought not with swords, but with the courage to stand unshaken in a room full of power. When James finally left, Catherine appeared with a glass of white wine. "He seems a little too interested in you," she teased. Michelle smiled, her eyes glinting. "Maybe, but I didn't come back to fall in love again, Sarah. I came back to fall in step with myself." Sarah nodded, grinning. "And you're shaking this city to its core, my dear." Later that night, after the gala ended, Michelle returned to her hotel suite. She opened her laptop with rows of figures, donations, partnership offers, and an invitation to speak. Her eyes lingered on the header of the page, City Children's Future Fund, founder, Michelle Anna. She whispered to herself, "This empire isn't built on power, it's built on faith." She closed the computer, stepped onto the balcony, and looked down at Manhattan's glittering sprawl lights blinking like a constellation of hope. She was no longer the woman cast out of the ballroom. She was the one commanding the stage. And the greatest irony? The very people who once humiliated her would soon be the ones begging for her time. Morning settled quietly over the Upper East Side. Snow still fell in thin, soft sheets, covering the cracks on the cobblestone sidewalks. But inside the Parker mansion, there were fractures no winter could hide, fissures running through pride, silence, and the gilded facade of perfection. Victoria Parker sat in the study, eyes fixed on a small wooden box resting on the desk. It was old, its brass edges tarnished, but what it held inside would change the Parker family forever. The night before, the housekeeper had found it while cleaning Todd's study. Victoria had recognized it immediately. The engraving beneath the box read, "To keep what's true." It was Michelle's handwriting. Victoria had held the key all night, too afraid to use it. Something deep inside told her that once she opened that box, she would never again see her family the same way. But when the first sunlight touched the window, she drew a long breath and turned the key. A small click broke the silence. The lid opened. Inside lay folders, letters, USB drives, and one pale yellow envelope, its front inscribed, "For the one who remains, when they are ready to face the truth." Victoria's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. Michelle's handwriting was steady, elegant, deliberate. "If you're reading this, you are the only one in this house brave enough to face the truth. Your father, Richard Parker, fell into a financial scandal 4 years ago. The family nearly went bankrupt. But someone paid that debt not for power or favor, but because they believed everyone deserves a second chance. That person was me." Victoria's pulse quickened. She kept reading. The funds were transferred through the city charity fund under another name to avoid attention. "The enclosed documents will prove it. If you ever wondered why I stayed silent while they humiliated me, this is why. I didn't need them to know what I'd done. I only wanted them to live a little more kindly." At the bottom was a bank record, a $3.2 million transfer from Michelle Anna Parker to a hidden account used to rescue Parker Group. Alongside it, a recording Richard Parker's voice, trembling. "Michelle, you've saved my family, but I'm afraid Margaret will never forgive this." Victoria froze. Tears welled and dropped onto the corner of the page. She looked around the grand room, once the pride of the Parker legacy, now only a prison built from lies. At 10 o'clock, the door opened. Margaret stepped in. "What are you doing here, Victoria?" Victoria startled, instinctively covering the box, but her mother had already seen. Her sharp gaze hardened. "What is that?" Victoria stayed silent. Margaret strode forward, snatched the box, and flipped it open. Within seconds, the color drained from her face. She recognized the numbers and the signatures. Every piece was real. "Oh God," she whispered. "Michelle did all this. And I." Her voice broke. Victoria's tone was steady but heavy with grief. "You called her greedy, a fraud, but the person who saved us was her." Margaret sank into a chair, shaking as she reread the letter. Tears slid down her cheeks and stained the paper. She knew everything, and she stayed silent. Victoria stood beside her. "We have to tell the truth, Mother. Everyone deserves to know." Margaret looked up, panic flickering in her eyes. "No, you don't understand. If this goes public, they'll ask why we hid it. They'll know I lied." Victoria's voice cut through the room. "Didn't you? You lied. You destroyed her name to keep Ors clean." Margaret said nothing. For the first time in her life, the woman who had made half of Manhattan tremble wept like a child. That afternoon, Victoria called James Wellington. "James, I need to see Michelle. There's something important, something that changes everything." They met at the City Children's Development Fund office 2 hours later. Michelle stepped out to greet them, calm and composed as always. When she saw the box in Victoria's hands, she understood. "You opened it." Victoria nodded, tears brimming. "You saved my family. Why didn't you tell anyone?" Michelle smiled faintly, her voice soft but sure. "Do you really think they would have believed me? To them, I was always an outsider. Sometimes silence is the only way to keep peace for others." James looked between the two women, one wronged, one repentant, and knew what they did next could reshape the city. "Michelle," he said, "let me help you bring this truth to light. Not for revenge, but so people finally know who you are." Michelle shook her head gently. "I don't need recognition, James. I need them to stop lying." Victoria spoke up, her voice trembling but firm. "They won't stop. Mother's terrified. She doesn't know what to do. But I do. I'll speak." Michelle touched her shoulder. "Are you sure? Once it's out, the Parker name will never be what it was." Victoria met her gaze, eyes bright with conviction. If a name was built on lies, it doesn't deserve to last. For a moment, Michelle said nothing. In Victoria, she saw the reflection of who she once was, a woman who believed truth was worth the cost. 2 days later, the New York Times broke the story. The secret box of Michelle Parker, the truth behind the broken engagement of the century. The article revealed the evidence, documents, letters, recordings, and Victoria Parker's complete statement. The city erupted. News channels replayed the story non-stop. Social media is flooded with commentary and outrage. For the first time in months, the tide of public opinion turned. The hashtag #SheToldTheTruth trended across platforms. People who had mocked her began posting apologies. Women trapped in gilded marriages wrote, "I want to be as brave as she was." That evening, Michelle sat on the rooftop of the foundation's building, watching the city glow beneath her. Sarah joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Z, truth never dies." Michelle smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But sometimes, it has to be buried deep enough to bloom at the right time." Sarah nodded, her voice full of warmth. "You're about to do what you were born to do, Anna, not as someone's wife, but as your own guide." Michelle said nothing. She gazed down at the rush of lights below and whispered to the wind, "Truth doesn't need defenders. It only needs time to walk into the light." Back at the Parker mansion, Margaret sat alone in the dark. On the table lay the open newspaper, the article about Michelle staring back at her. She reached out, fingers trembling, tracing Michelle's picture. "You've won, Michelle," she murmured. "But losing feels like peace for the first time in my life." Then she closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely, not for her reputation, but for the release she'd spent a lifetime denying herself. 3 days after the New York Times published The Secret Box, New York still buzzed with her name. Every podcast, talk show, and social media feed revolved around one woman, Michelle Anna Parker. Once branded the runaway wife, the unstable socialite, she was now hailed as a symbol of truth and resilience. But for the Parker family, it was nothing short of a nightmare. At the Parker Group headquarters, the air felt drained of oxygen. Partners were cutting ties. The city's Financial Ethics Board had reopened the 2018 case the year Michelle had secretly saved the company. Stocks were in free fall. Todd sat slumped in his office, his computer screen flooded with headlines. The Parkers hid their benefactor, the truth behind the gilded mansion. The door burst open. Margaret entered, no longer the proud matriarch she once was. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion, her voice low. "Todd, you need to say something. You must apologize to her publicly." He looked up, his eyes dull with regret. "Mother, she doesn't need my apology anymore. Michelle, she's already beyond us." Margaret's tone sharpened. "You don't understand. If you stay silent, this company dies." Todd gave a bitter laugh. "Then let it. Maybe it deserves to. It took losing everything for me to realize how foolish I've been." He stood and walked out, leaving his mother alone amid piles of useless contracts, ashes of a legacy. Across town, Michelle sat in her new office at the foundation. It wasn't lavish, just sunlight, fresh coffee, and the laughter of young staffers. On her desk lay a stack of letters, from homemakers, students, and women who had once been silenced. Every letter began the same way. "I saw your story." Dr. Sarah Moore entered, holding a single sheet of paper. "You should see this." It was an invitation from the New York State Women's Commission, honoring her for courage and service to truth. Michelle exhaled softly. "I don't think I've done anything heroic." Sarah smiled. "You lived honestly. In a world built on pretending, that's rebellion." That afternoon, Michelle appeared on the talk show Voices of Change. The host leaned forward. "Do you feel vindicated now that the truth is out, that those who hurt you are finally facing consequences?" Michelle looked straight into the camera, her voice calm. "No. Justice isn't when someone else falls, it's when people see and admit what they've done. If I hated them, I'd be just like them. I only wanted them to look just once at the woman they dismissed and see who she truly was." The studio fell silent. No applause, no whispers, only the quiet, shared ache of recognition. In the Parker mansion, Margaret watched the broadcast alone at that same hour. When Michelle spoke those words, she set her glass down and wept. "She doesn't even hate me," she whispered. She picked up her phone, hands trembling, and dialed. A voice answered, "Michelle Anna, it's me, Margaret Parker." Her voice was fragile, breaking. "I don't know if I still have the right to call you." There was a brief silence. Then Michelle replied gently, "You always have the right, Mrs. Parker. I never took that away from you." Margaret drew a shaky breath. Thank you. I just wanted to say you've done what I never could. You faced yourself. If there's anything I can do to make things right, tell me. Michelle's voice was soft, almost kind. There's nothing left to fix, Mrs. Parker. The truth already has. That night, an email arrived in Michelle's inbox from dwellington@wellingtongroup.com. Michelle, I'd like to meet, not because of Victoria or the press, but because I have a proposal, something that could change everything. She read it twice, then closed her eyes. James Wellington never spoke without purpose, and her intuition told her the final chapter of this journey was near, where justice would no longer mean punishment, but choice. 2 days later, they met at a small cafe overlooking the Hudson. Sunlight spilled across the glass windows, glimmering on the river's ripples. James arrived, steady as ever, but with an urgency in his eyes. Thank you for coming. You said it was important? He nodded, placing a thick folder on the table. Wellington Group is launching a social renewal alliance, a partnership between charities, universities, and companies. I want you to lead the New York division. Michelle frowned slightly. You know I don't seek power. I'm not offering power, Michelle. I'm offering Reach the chance to make something larger and right. You could give thousands of women and children a voice, not just here, but across the country. Silence fell. Outside, the river lapped against the shore. Michelle's eyes softened. Aren't you afraid of what people will say? That you're helping the woman who shook high society? James smiled faintly. I'm afraid. But I'm more afraid of living in a world where good people stay silent because they're scared of gossip. His words lingered in the air, clean and honest. Michelle looked out at the water. You're right, James. Maybe it's time I stop hiding from the good things, just because I once got hurt by them. He extended his hand. Then welcome back, Michelle Anna. She took it, her smile quiet but luminous. Not the smile of triumph, but of peace, of someone who had finally made peace with her past. That night, she stood alone on the balcony of her new apartment. Below her, New York shimmered rivers of light flowing through the city's veins. She thought of everything: the night of humiliation, the ring that fell, the quiet hotel mornings, the wooden box, and now this invitation to lead something born not from pain, but from purpose. The circle had closed, yet she knew the real journey was only beginning. She whispered into the cold wind, words barely carried by the night. Justice isn't when someone pays. Justice is when no one else has to endure what you did. Then she closed her eyes, letting the wind carry away her sorrow. Tomorrow, she would step into the world again, not as someone's wife, not as someone's scandal, but as Michelle Anna, the woman who chose to become the light. A year had passed. April had returned to New York with the scent of warm rain, and the cherry trees along Central Park had burst into bloom, as if the whole city were breathing with spring. On Fifth Avenue, sunlight shimmered off the glass facade of a new building. The Michelle Anna Foundation funds the City Children's Future Community Center. Inside, Michelle walked down the long oak hallway where children ran laughing, their joy echoing off the walls. A curly-haired little girl darted up and wrapped her arms around Michelle's leg. Miss Michelle, will you read us a story today? Michelle laughed, kneeling to meet her gaze. I will, but only if you promise to read it to someone else after. I promise, the girl shouted before running off, her laughter trailing through the corridor. Dr. Sarah Moore appeared beside her, eyes shining with pride. You know, she said softly, watching these kids, I think you finally found where you belong. Michelle smiled, her gaze tender. I used to think I'd lost everything. But sometimes you have to lose what's false before what's real can find its way to you. She stopped before the wide glass window and looked at the park below. On a bench sat an older woman, familiar even from afar, a grey coat with a small purse resting in her lap. Margaret Parker. Sarah followed her gaze. She's here again? Michelle nodded. She comes every month, never speaks, just sits there and looks up. Sarah hesitated. Do you want to go down and say hello? Michelle shook her head gently. No. Some meetings don't need words. Her being here means she understands. She smiled, a soft, wistful smile, like someone looking back on a road once filled with pain, now lined with peace. Meanwhile, in a small cafe on 53rd Street, Todd Parker sat silently, staring at his phone. The morning news showed images from the center's opening ceremony. He touched the screen, her face, her light. He had lost her, not for lack of love, but for lacking the courage to love her rightly. A drop of coffee spilled onto the table, merging with a tear he hadn't wiped away. "Congratulations, Michelle," he whispered. "You found where you belong. I'm still trying to find mine." Across from him, Victoria looked up with a small smile. "You know," she said gently, "maybe the best way to love someone is to live kindly, the way they do." Todd nodded, eyes drifting to the window where life continued to move. Not for anyone, but for everyone. That afternoon, Michelle left the center and wandered into Central Park. Spring wind brushed her hair, scattering petals across her shoulders. Beneath the cherry trees, James Wellington was waiting, a folded newspaper in hand. He smiled as she approached. "Congratulations. New York just got a new home for hope and children." Michelle returned the smile. "I didn't do anything grand. I just stitched up the tears I once saw in the world." James was quiet for a moment. Then he asked softly, "Then who stitches up the tears inside you?" She looked at him, surprise mingling with warmth. "Maybe time. Or maybe I don't need to stitch them. Maybe I need to learn how to smile at the scars." They walked together beneath the pink canopy, petals falling like soft rain. James said, "I still haven't given up asking you to join the National Alliance. You have vision, Michelle." She laughed. "I only have a heart, James. The vision you seem to see it for me." He turned to her, his gaze steady, gentle. "You know, sometimes people don't need to see the future. They need someone who believes they're heading in the right direction." They stopped by the lake, where the sunset painted the water gold. "Thank you," Michelle murmured, "for believing in me when no one else did." James shook his head. "No, Michelle. The world didn't know who you were yet. I was only lucky enough to see it sooner." A breeze swept by, lifting a petal onto her shoulder. She looked up at the sky, sunlight dripping like honey through the branches. "The late blooming flowers," she whispered, "are still flowers. They need more time to find their season." James smiled. "Maybe you are the late spring the world has been waiting for." That evening, when the city lights came alive, Michelle sat on the balcony of her apartment. On the table lay a weathered notebook, the same one she had carried the night she left the Parker mansion. She opened to the last page and wrote, "I once thought endings meant loss, but endings are just doors opening into a quieter, deeper, truer kind of happiness." She set the pen down and closed her eyes, listening to the hum of the city, the wind, and the steady rhythm of her heart. A chapter had closed. New fireworks, new applause. Only peace and light. The kind she had spent half a lifetime seeking. Somewhere in New York, Margaret, Todd, Victoria, Sarah, and James were each beginning again in their own imperfect, honest ways. They were no longer flawless, but they were real. And high above the city, Michelle looked down, smiling softly, whispering to all those still finding their way through the dark, "Don't fear blooming late. Sometimes the flowers that come last, these are the ones that bloom the longest."